The War of the Worlds, Chapter 2, continued. The creature gave a strange cry, and immediately another of them appeared at the opening of the cylinder. I turned and ran wildly towards a group of trees, stumbling as I ran, for I could not tear my eyes from the pit. The field around the pit was still dotted with people standing, like myself, staring at these creatures in fascination and terror. My body was paralyzed with fear, but my brain was sparked with curiosity about these creatures and the cylinder in which they had come to Earth from Mars. Chapter 3, The Heat Ray. I didn't dare go back towards the pit, but I longed to gaze into it. I began walking in a big curve, seeking some higher ground from which I could see into the pit, but not be seen by the Martians. Once, a leash of black tentacles, like the arms of an octopus, reached above the pit, then immediately disappeared. Soon afterward, a thin rod appeared, rising joint by joint. At the tip of the rod was a disc that spun around in a wobbling motion. What could it be? By now, most of the people on the common had gathered in two groups on opposite sides of the pit. I stationed myself on a small hill, slightly higher than the crowds of people, but for a long while, as the sun set and afterward, nothing further happened. This gave the crowd new confidence, and small groups of people began to move toward the pit. At this moment, Ogilvy, Stent, and Henderson came out from behind a tree and waving a white flag headed for the pit. "What do you plan to do?" I called to Ogilvy. "We've had a conference," he explained, "and we've decided that the Martians are obviously intelligent creatures, even though their bodies are monstrous. So we are going to show them that we, too, are intelligent." Before I had a chance to comment on Ogilvy's explanation, a flash of light came out from the pit, and the three long, powerful puffs of green flame rose up, one after the other, into the air, followed by a faint hissing sound. The hissing changed into a loud humming noise. The humming was revealed as coming from something humped or dome-shaped as it slowly rose out of the pit. Flickers of white flame leaped out from it and towards the men with the white flag. In an instant, each man turned to fire, staggered, and fell. I stood staring, hardly realizing that this noiseless, blinding flame brought death as it leaped from man to man in this group, and then continued on from man to woman to child around the common. It brought fiery destruction as well, as it leaped swiftly from trees to bushes to distant wooden buildings. Just as the white flame was leaping toward the hill on which I was standing, the hissing and humming ceased, and the black dome-like object sank slowly out of sight into the pit. All this had happened so swiftly that I stood motionless, dumbfounded and dazzled by the flashes of light. If that flame, or heat ray as I called it, had made a full circle, it would have caught me in its path, but it passed me by, thus sparing my life. I gazed at the spot where the little group with the white flag had stood only minutes before. This little group no longer existed. The people around them had either fled with the fire. The people around them had either fled with the first burst of flame or had been protected by the high sandhills as the heat ray passed over their heads. But as the trees above them caught fire, sparks and burning twigs fell on them. Hats and dresses caught fire. Shrieks and shouts filled the air as men, women, and children pushed at those in their way to reach the road to Woking. crushed and trampling each other in the darkness. Crushing and trampling each other in the darkness. I suddenly realized I was alone on this dark common, helpless and unprotected. With a panic and terror I had never known before, I turned and ran stumbling through the heather, crashing blindly into trees and passing more than 40 bodies, burned and destroyed beyond recognition. I ran until I could go no farther. Then I staggered and fell by the roadside. How long I lay there I do not know. When I finally sat up, I began to wonder if I, a decent, ordinary citizen, had dreamed everything. I got up unsteadily and staggered as if I were drunk. Everything around me, the night, my home on Mayberry Hill ahead, a train passing in the distance, everything was so serene, so normal, so familiar. But behind me, reaching Mayberry, I spied 2 men and a woman talking at the gate of the houses. Talking at the gate of one house. Reaching Mayberry, I spied 2 men and a woman talking at the gate of one house in a row of pretty little houses. "What news is there from the common?" I gasped weakly. "Ain't you just been there?" asked one of the men, seeing the direction from which I had come. "People are acting silly all about the common," said the woman. "What's it all about?" "Haven't you heard?" "Of the creatures from Mars?" I asked, surprised. "Quite enough, thanks," said the woman with a laugh. The men joined her laughter. "But the ray," I began, "and Ogilvy and Henderson and Stent—" I tried again, but I could not finish my sentences. The 2 men and the women laughed again. I felt foolish and angry. "You'll hear more yet," I cried, and turned away from them to head toward my house. My appearance, so haggard and dirty, startled my wife, but she led me into the dining room and poured me some wine. I finally gathered enough energy to tell her what I had seen. Seeing fear spread over her face, I tried to reassure her. "Do not become alarmed, my dear. These creatures are the most sluggish things ever to crawl. They will probably keep control of the pit and kill people who come near it, but they cannot get out." "But they might," she said with concern. "And they might come here." I poured some wine for her and tried again to reassure her. "But they can scarcely move. Ogilvy explained to me how the force of gravity on Earth here is 3 times stronger than on Mars. Therefore, a Martian would weigh 3 times more on Earth than on Mars. Although his strength would be the same, don't you see, my dear, his own body would be a lead weight to him." My wife was still pale with fear. "But why have they killed so many already?" "They are quite possibly mad with terror," I said reassuringly. "It was a foolish act, but perhaps they came to Earth not really expecting to find any living things. And now, my dear, let us have a pleasant dinner and leave the Martians for the government and the police to handle." I did not know it, but that was the last civilized dinner I was to eat for many strange and terrible days.